The night was quiet in the small town. Streets were empty, shops were closed, and only a few streetlights lit the long road. Inside a police car, two officers were driving slowly, keeping watch as they usually did during their night shift. It was one of those calm nights when nothing much happened and they were expecting the same. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the soft voice of the radio in the background. Officer Miller leaned back in his seat, yawning, and said to his partner, Officer Davis, that he hoped the night would stay this peaceful. Davis agreed and kept his eyes on the road. But then, something unusual caught their attention. Far ahead, under the faint glow of a street lamp, a shadow appeared. At first, they thought it might be a person crossing the road, but as they drew closer, they realized it was a large dog. A German Shepherd stood firmly in the middle of the lane, staring straight at their car. The animal didn't look scared. In fact, it didn't even move when the bright headlights hit its eyes. Miller slowed down the car, frowning. "What's this dog doing here at this time of night?" he muttered. Davis leaned forward, squinting at the animal. The dog wasn't acting like any stray they had seen before. It wasn't wandering or running away. Instead, it was standing its ground as if waiting for them. When the police car came to a full stop just a few feet away, the German Shepherd began barking loudly. But it wasn't an angry bark. It sounded urgent, almost desperate, like it was trying to speak to them. Both officers exchanged looks of surprise. "Should I get out?" Davis asked, already reaching for the door handle. "Careful," Miller replied. "We don't know if it's dangerous, but deep down, both of them felt something different. There was something unusual about the way the dog was behaving. Its tail was low, not wagging, and its eyes kept darting between the officers and something in the distance. Then suddenly the dog turned around, ran a few steps away, and stopped again. It barked once more, then looked back at the car as if calling them. Davis stepped out of the car slowly, his hand resting on his flashlight. The night air was cool, and the sound of the dog's bark echoed across the empty street. The German Shepherd's eyes met his, filled with a kind of pleading that Davis had never seen in an animal before. "It wants us to follow," Davis said in a low voice. Miller frowned but stepped out too. "That's crazy. Dogs don't do that. It's probably just lost." Yet even as he said those words, he couldn't shake the feeling that the animal was trying to tell them something. The dog barked again and trotted a few more steps down a side road, then stopped and waited. It was clear. It would not leave until they followed. Miller and Davis climbed back into their car and slowly drove after the dog. The German Shepherd stayed just ahead of the headlights, trotting at a steady pace. Every few steps it would stop, look back to check if they were following, then continue forward. "This is strange," Miller murmured, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. "It's like it knows exactly what it's doing." The further they drove, the darker it became. The main road was well lit, but this side road had only a few flickering lamps. The trees on both sides cast long shadows across the pavement, and the silence was broken only by the occasional bark of the dog. "Where is it taking us?" Davis whispered. The dog suddenly turned down an even narrower lane. Miller hesitated but followed, his curiosity now stronger than his doubt. His heartbeat quickened. Something about this felt different from any call or patrol they had done before. As they moved deeper into the dark lane, the dog's urgency grew. Its barking became louder, more frequent. It would run ahead faster, then stop sharply, almost as if shouting at them to hurry. Inside the car, both officers felt uneasy. The calm night had shifted into something tense and mysterious. Neither spoke much, but their eyes stayed glued on the animal leading them through the shadows. At one point, the dog ran so fast they thought they had lost it, but then it reappeared just at the edge of the headlights, waiting again. Miller slowed the car inside. "I don't know what's going on, but this isn't just some stray dog. Look at how smart it is." Davis nodded, his eyes wide with both fear and fascination. "It's like it knows someone's in trouble." Those words hung heavy in the air. They didn't want to admit it, but both officers were beginning to believe the same thing. Why else would a dog stop a police car and insist on leading them somewhere? The night seemed longer as they followed the strange guide. The quiet roads, the occasional rustling of leaves, and the steady sound of paws hitting the ground all created a suspenseful silence. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath. Finally, the German Shepherd slowed down. It turned its head, barked once, and then ran quickly around a curve. Miller pressed the brakes gently and steered the car after it. As they made the turn, both men gasped at what they saw ahead. The dog had stopped again, standing right in front of something in the darkness. The headlights illuminated the shape of an old vehicle, parked awkwardly at the side of the road. But the car didn't look normal. Its front end was slightly smashed and the windshield was fogged. The officers' hearts began to race. Miller's hands tightened on the wheel. Davis's breath caught in his throat. The dog barked loudly and ran to the side of the damaged vehicle, scratching at the door with its paws, whining now instead of barking. It looked back at them once more, its eyes glowing in the headlights with desperation. Miller parked the patrol car and turned to his partner, his face pale. Something's not right. Davis opened his door quickly, grabbing his flashlight. His pulse pounded in his ears. They both stepped out and slowly approached the vehicle. The dog whined louder, circling the car, scratching again, its tail down and body tense. Neither of the officers spoke as they reached the vehicle, but inside, through the glass, something caught their eyes. Davis raised the flashlight, and when the beam landed on the inside, his whole body stiffened. Miller leaned in too, and the color drained from his face. Whatever was inside that car left them both frozen, their skin pale, their minds racing. They had followed a dog, not knowing what they would find, and now they were standing on the edge of a discovery that would change their entire night. The German shepherd stood beside them, barking once more, as if urging them to act quickly before it was too late. For a moment, time seemed frozen. The two officers stood by the side of the road, their flashlights pointed toward the old vehicle. Their breathing grew heavier, their hearts thumping fast, and the German shepherd's cries filled the silence. It was not a simple bark anymore. It was urgent, like a cry for help. Officer Davis pressed the light closer to the foggy window. His hand trembled slightly as he tried to look inside. The glass was dirty, streaked with moisture, but when the beam of light cut through, he saw what looked like a figure slumped over in the front seat. "There's someone inside," Davis whispered. His throat felt dry and his voice cracked. Miller stepped closer and shined his own light through another window. His stomach tightened when he saw a hand resting limply against the steering wheel. The skin was pale, unmoving. His face turned cold. "You're right. Somebody's in there, and they don't look good." The German shepherd barked sharply, then pawed at the driver's side door as if begging them to hurry. Davis pulled the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. "Locked," he muttered nervously. He tried again, tugging harder, but it was stuck. The dog circled the car, whining louder, and then ran back to the officers, pushing against their legs with its head almost pleading. Miller grabbed his radio and called for backup. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. We've got an unconscious person inside a vehicle on Oak Lane, possible accident, unknown condition. We need paramedics immediately." The radio crackled as the dispatcher confirmed, but both men knew that waiting might be too late. Davis turned to Miller. "We can't just stand here. We have to get them out." Miller nodded firmly. He pulled out his baton and smashed it hard against the window. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. The second hit broke through, scattering shards across the ground. The German shepherd jumped back but quickly returned, barking loudly. The officers reached through the broken glass and unlocked the door. As soon as it opened, a wave of cold, stale air rushed out. The smell was strong, a mix of gasoline and something metallic. Davis leaned inside and touched the person's shoulder. It was a man, maybe in his late 30s, unconscious and barely breathing. His head rested heavily against the wheel and his face was pale. A dark line ran across his forehead, a sign of injury. His chest rose and fell weakly like he was fighting for every breath. "He's alive," Davis said quickly, relief mixed with urgency in his voice. "But he's in bad shape." Miller reached in and carefully pulled the man upright. With Davis's help, they managed to slide him out of the car and onto the ground. The man groaned faintly but didn't open his eyes. The German shepherd pressed close, licking his hand and whining deeply as if to comfort him. Miller crouched beside the injured man, checking his pulse. "It was weak, but there. We need that ambulance fast." Davis grabbed the first aid kit from the patrol car and hurried back. He opened it quickly, pulling out bandages and gauze. His hands worked with shaky precision as he tried to stop the bleeding from the man's head wound. Miller kept pressure on the injury while speaking in calm words, though his own nerves were tight. "You're gonna be all right, sir. Just hold on." The dog lay beside the man, its body pressed close as though guarding him. Its eyes stayed on the officers, shining with trust but also urgency, like it was asking them not to fail. The night, which had begun so quiet, now pulsed with tension. The flashing light of the police car illuminated the scene in red and blue, casting moving shadows across the trees. Every sound seemed louder: the rustle of leaves, the dog's cries, the faint groans of the injured man. Davis looked around the area. This car, it looks like it swerved off the road and hit those trees. But why didn't anyone see this earlier? Miller scanned the road with his flashlight. The car was hidden by branches half covered in darkness. It's easy to miss at night, if it weren't for this dog. He paused, staring at the animal. We would have driven past without even noticing. The truth hit them hard. This man might have been left here all night, alone and bleeding, if his loyal companion hadn't gone searching for help. Minutes dragged by like hours until the distant sound of sirens broke the silence. Red and white lights flashed as an ambulance pulled up behind the patrol car. 2 paramedics rushed out with their gear. The officers quickly explained the situation, stepping back to give space. The German Shepherd barked anxiously as strangers surrounded its owner, but Davis knelt down and gently patted its head. "It's okay, boy. They're here to help." The dog whined but allowed the paramedics to work. They checked the man's vital signs, gave him oxygen, and carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. His breathing steadied slightly, though he still hadn't opened his eyes. As they loaded him into the ambulance, the dog tried to climb in too, but one of the medics held up a hand. "Sorry, we can't take animals inside." The German Shepherd barked and jumped against the stretcher, refusing to be left behind. Its eyes were wide with fear and its body shook with emotion. Miller stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Don't worry. We'll make sure the dog stays safe. He's the reason we even found the man." The medics nodded quickly, too focused on their patient to argue. They closed the ambulance doors and sped away, leaving the officers and the dog standing in the flashing lights of the patrol car. For a long moment, silence returned to the road. The dog sat on the ground, staring at the spot where the ambulance had disappeared. Its head hung low as if it understood its owner had been taken away. Davis crouched down beside the animal. "You did something incredible tonight. You saved him." The dog looked at him with tired eyes, then rested its head against Davis's arm. It was exhausted, but it had done its job. Miller placed a hand on his hip, staring at the scene. "You know, if we tell people this story, they won't believe it. A dog stopping a police car and leading us to an accident? It sounds unreal." But Davis shook his head. "I don't care if anyone believes it. We know what happened, and this dog deserves to be called a hero." They decided to take the German Shepherd back to the station for the night, until they could reach the hospital in the morning. The dog climbed into the back of the patrol car without a fight, curling up quietly but keeping its eyes fixed on the officers. As they drove back through the empty streets, both men stayed silent, each lost in thought. They had seen many strange things on duty, but nothing quite like this. The memory of the dog standing bravely in the middle of the road, refusing to move until they followed, would stay with them forever. The night wasn't quiet anymore. It had turned into a story of loyalty, courage, and the unspoken bond between a man and his dog. And for Officers Miller and Davis, it was a reminder that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. At the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic, and the bright white lights made everything look sharper, colder. The ambulance had already arrived minutes earlier, and the injured man had been rushed into the emergency room. Officers Miller and Davis pulled up to the entrance with the German Shepherd in the back of their patrol car. The dog had refused to relax during the ride. It sat upright, ears pricked, eyes darting at every sound. Every now and then it gave a low whine, as though worried about what was happening inside. When the officers stepped out, the dog leaped down quickly and tugged against the leash they had clipped on its collar. It pulled hard toward the hospital doors, unwilling to be separated from its owner. Miller sighed, shaking his head. This dog's not giving up. Inside the hospital, doctors and nurses moved quickly. They transferred the injured man onto a bed, attached monitors, and began checking his breathing. His pulse was weak, and his forehead injury had caused him to lose a lot of blood. A nurse pressed gauze gently against the wound while another started an IV line. The man's chest rose and fell faintly, and everyone around him worked with urgency. The officers stood at the edge of the hallway watching. Davis still held onto the German Shepherd, who struggled against him, barking softly, its nails clicking against the floor tiles. The staff turned their heads, surprised to see the animal inside the hospital. "I'm sorry," a nurse said, shaking her head. "Animals can't be allowed in here." Davis knelt down beside the dog, whispering to calm it. "I know, buddy. I know you want to be with him, but you've done your part. Let the doctors take care of him now." The German shepherd whined and finally lay down on the cool floor, eyes never leaving the doors that led to the emergency room. Its chest rose and fell quickly, but after a while its breathing slowed, as if the long night had drained it of energy. The doctors continued their work inside, and the tension in the hallway grew heavier with each passing minute. Miller rubbed the back of his neck. "If that dog hadn't stopped us, this man might never have made it here. We probably would have found his car in the morning." "Too late," Davis nodded, staring at the animal. "It's like the dog knew exactly what to do. Think about it. Running straight to a police car, refusing to move, then guiding us all the way there. That's not luck. That's loyalty." Their conversation was interrupted when the doors finally swung open. A doctor stepped out, pulling off his gloves. His face looked tired but steady. "He's stable for now. We've stopped the bleeding and his vitals are improving. He'll need to stay for observation, but he's alive because you got him here in time." The officers felt relief wash over them, but before they could respond, the German shepherd jumped to its feet and rushed toward the doctor, barking and wagging its tail for the first time that night. The doctor stepped back, startled, but Miller held the leash tight. "This dog is his," Miller explained. "It's the reason we even found him." The doctor looked at the animal, then at the officers, and his expression softened. "Then you should know, if it weren't for this dog, that man wouldn't have survived. He lost a dangerous amount of blood, just a little later, and we might not have saved him." The words struck the officers deeply. They exchanged glances, their earlier suspicions confirmed. The German shepherd had done more than any human could. It had sensed the danger, left its injured owner, and found help in the only way it knew how. Hours passed as the hospital grew quieter. The German shepherd refused to sleep, its eyes fixed on the emergency room doors. The officers took turns sitting on the bench, watching over the animal. By morning, the waiting area was filled with a gentle light as the sun began to rise outside. Finally, a nurse came out and said softly, "You can see him now, but only for a short while." The officers looked at each other, then down at the dog. It didn't wait for permission. As soon as the door opened, the German shepherd pulled hard and rushed inside, its nails clicking against the floor. Miller and Davis followed behind, smiling despite their exhaustion. In the hospital room, the injured man lay on the bed with bandages wrapped around his head. His breathing was steadier and his color was returning. When the German shepherd reached him, it let out a soft bark and jumped up against the side of the bed. The man stirred slightly, his lips moving as though trying to form words. His hand lifted weakly, and the dog pressed its nose against his palm, letting out a small whimper of relief. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle sounds of reunion. Davis cleared his throat. "Looks like someone's happy to see you." The man's eyes fluttered open just a little and his lips curved faintly into a smile. His voice was faint, but the words were clear enough. "Good boy. You found help?" Tears filled Davis's eyes as he looked at Miller. Neither of them spoke, but both knew this was a moment they'd never forget. The doctors asked the officers to give the patient time to rest, so they stepped outside again, leaving the dog curled faithfully at his owner's bedside. In the hallway, Miller shook his head slowly. "You know, we've answered a lot of calls in this town. We've seen accidents, fires, break-ins, but I've never seen anything like this. A dog leading us like that? It's unreal." Davis leaned back against the wall, sighing. "Unreal, maybe, but it happened. And that dog deserves more than just a thank you. It deserves to be recognized for saving a life." The hospital staff, who had been skeptical at first, began telling each other the story. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others smiled warmly. Word spread quickly, and soon nurses from other floors came down just to see the loyal German shepherd sitting by its owner's bed. By afternoon, the injured man was awake enough to speak more clearly. He told the officers his name was Richard, and explained what had happened. He had been driving home late from work when he swerved to avoid a deer on the road. His car slid off the lane and crashed into the trees. He remembered hitting his head, and then everything went dark. The only thing he could recall after that was his dog, Max, barking frantically. "I guess he ran out looking for help," Richard said weakly, stroking Max's fur. "I don't know how he did it, but he saved me." The officers smiled and nodded, their hearts warming at the truth. Richard was alive because Max had refused to give up. That evening, when the sun had dipped low and the hospital halls grew quiet again, Miller and Davis stood at the exit doors, preparing to leave. They had spent nearly the whole day there, making sure both man and dog were safe. As they walked out, Davis looked back one last time at the hospital window where Max sat on the floor beside his recovering owner. The sight stayed with him. Two lives tied together, both stronger because of the other, and though their shift had ended, the story was just beginning to spread beyond the hospital walls. People would soon hear about the night a German shepherd stopped a police car, begged for help, and saved its master's life. The next morning brought a new kind of energy to the hospital. Nurses walked the halls carrying trays. Doctors spoke in calm voices, and the sound of rolling carts echoed softly through the building. But inside one quiet room, the mood was completely different. There was warmth, loyalty, and a bond that no words could describe. Richard lay propped up against pillows, looking much better than the night before. His color had returned, and though his head was still bandaged, his eyes were brighter. At his side, Max, the German shepherd, sat proudly. The dog hadn't left his place all night. Even when nurses came in to check Richard's vitals, Max kept watch, his eyes sharp and ears alert. Every time a stranger entered the room, the dog rose slightly, ready to protect his owner. Richard stroked Max's fur slowly, whispering soft words of thanks. "You saved me, boy. I don't even know how you did it, but you saved my life." Max responded by resting his head gently on Richard's lap, letting out a deep sigh of comfort. Later in the morning, Officers Miller and Davis returned. They carried coffee cups in their hands, looking a little tired but still smiling. When they entered the room, Max's ears perked up. Recognizing them, he gave a short bark and wagged his tail. "There's our hero," Davis said warmly, crouching down to pat the dog's head. "How's our patient?" Richard chuckled softly, his voice still weak. "Thanks to you both, and mostly to him, I'm alive. The doctors said if I'd been found even an hour later, I might not be here." Miller shook his head in amazement. "Your dog is one of a kind. I've never seen anything like it. He didn't just look for help. He found us, and he wouldn't give up until we followed." Richard's eyes grew wet with tears as he listened. He remembered flashes of the night, the crash, the pain, the dizziness, but most of all he remembered Max barking, refusing to leave his side. He never imagined that his loyal friend would run through the night, find a police car, and bring help back to him. The officers stayed for a while, chatting with Richard about what had happened. They explained how Max had blocked their patrol car, barking and leading them straight to the hidden wreck. Richard shook his head again and again, overwhelmed by the thought of it. News of the story spread quickly through the hospital. Staff members whispered about the dog that saved his master, and soon even people who weren't assigned to that floor came by just to peek at the famous German shepherd. Max didn't seem to care for the attention. His focus remained on Richard, as if the rest of the world didn't matter. By the afternoon, a local reporter arrived, asking for permission to cover the story. At first, Richard hesitated. He was a private man and not used to the spotlight. But when he looked down at Max, who had given everything to save him, he realized the story wasn't about him. It was about loyalty, bravery, and the silent voice of an animal who had spoken louder than words. So Richard agreed, and the officers also shared their side of the story. The reporter scribbled notes, asked questions, and took pictures of Max sitting proudly at his owner's side. The article would later appear in the local newspaper with the headline, "Loyal Dog Stops Police Car and Saves Owner's Life." When the story reached the community, it touched hearts everywhere. People called the hospital to ask about Richard's recovery and to offer treats or donations for Max. Children sent drawings of dogs with capes, calling Max a superhero. Some even came to the hospital to see the bravest dog in town. But while the world celebrated, Richard thought quietly about the night of the accident. He remembered swerving to avoid the deer, the crash, the sudden pain, and then darkness. He remembered Max's barks echoing in the distance as he drifted in and out of consciousness. He realized now that his survival wasn't luck. It was because Max had refused to give up. One evening, while sitting in his hospital bed, Richard spoke softly to Miller and Davis, who had stopped by again. "I owe you two a lot, but I owe Max everything. I never trained him to do something like this. I don't know how he knew." Davis smiled and patted the dog. "Sometimes dogs just know. It's instinct, loyalty, love. Whatever it was, it saved your life." Miller leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You should be proud. Not every person gets to have a friend like him. Richard nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He reached out and placed both hands on Max's head. I am proud. He's more than a friend, he's family. That night, Richard slept better than he had since the accident. The soft sound of Max's breathing beside the bed gave him peace. Every time he stirred awake, Max was there, watching, guarding, making sure his owner was safe. Days passed, and Richard grew stronger. Soon the doctors told him he would be ready to go home. The officers arranged to drive him, and the hospital staff gathered to say goodbye. Many bent down to pet Max, thanking him for what he had done. The dog wagged his tail politely, but his focus remained on Richard, who was now standing tall again. When they finally left the hospital, Richard inhaled deeply, glad to breathe fresh air again. He looked up at the sky, grateful for another chance at life. Miller and Davis helped him into their car, while Max jumped in happily, taking his usual spot beside his owner. As they drove through town, people waved and smiled, recognizing the dog from the news. Some even clapped as the car passed by. Richard smiled weakly, still overwhelmed by the attention. But Max didn't seem bothered. He sat proudly, ears perked, eyes forward, as though he knew he had done something great. Back at Richard's home, the officers helped him inside. Max bounded happily around the living room, sniffing his familiar surroundings before rushing back to Richard's side. The house felt alive again. Before leaving, Davis crouched down and gave Max one last scratch behind the ears. You're a true hero, buddy. Don't ever forget that, Miller added with a smile. If the department ever needs a K9, we know where to look. Richard laughed softly, shaking his head. He's already done more than any K9 I know. He's staying with me. The officers nodded, understanding completely. They said their goodbyes and promised to check in soon. As their patrol car disappeared down the road, Richard sank into his chair with Max beside him. He felt tired, but in his heart there was only gratitude. That night, as Richard sat quietly with Max resting at his feet, he realized something important. Life could change in a single moment. But no matter what happened, he knew he was never truly alone. Not with Max by his side. The story of that night would continue to spread. But for Richard, it wasn't about the fame or the headlines. It was about love, loyalty, and the second chance he'd been given because of a dog who refused to let him go. The days after Richard's return home were filled with quiet gratitude. He moved carefully around his house, still healing from the injuries, but every step reminded him that he was alive because of Max. The German shepherd never left his side. Whether Richard sat in his favorite chair, rested in bed, or tried to prepare a small meal in the kitchen, Max was there, watching closely, ready to act if needed. Neighbors began to stop by more often. They had read about the story in the newspaper and wanted to see the dog that had saved a man's life. Children pressed their noses against the fence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the hero dog. Some brought treats, others brought toys, and many just wanted to pet Max and thank him. Richard accepted the visits with a gentle smile. Though he wasn't used to the attention, he knew the story had touched something deep in the hearts of many. One morning, Miller and Davis returned, parking their patrol car outside the house. Max's ears perked up the moment he heard the familiar sound of the engine. He bounded to the door, tail wagging, and barked with excitement. Richard chuckled as he opened the door to greet the officers. You've got a guard dog and a welcoming committee all in one, Davis joked as Max ran up to them, licking their hands. Miller stepped inside and looked at Richard. How are you holding up? Better every day, Richard said honestly. I owe both of you for what you did that night. But most of all, I owe him. He pointed to Max, who now lay stretched out at his feet, his head resting proudly on his paws. Miller nodded. We've been talking at the station. People want to honor Max. The chief even mentioned holding a small ceremony, not just for publicity, but because what he did was truly remarkable. Richard blinked in surprise. A ceremony? For Max? Of course, Davis replied. He saved your life. He did something most humans wouldn't even think to do. He deserves recognition. Richard looked down at Max, who tilted his head as if listening. A smile spread across Richard's face. If it helps people understand how much animals mean to us, then yes. He deserves it. A week later, the local police department organized a gathering in front of the town hall. The news had spread quickly. and by the time the event began, dozens of people had gathered. Families, children, and even other dog owners came to witness the celebration of Max's bravery. Richard stood beside Max, who wore a new collar polished to a shine. Miller and Davis flanked them proudly. The police chief gave a short speech recounting the incredible events of that night. He spoke about loyalty, instinct, and the bond between humans and animals. Then, in front of the cheering crowd, he bent down and placed a medal on Max's collar. The German Shepherd stood tall, ears alert, tail wagging. The crowd clapped and cheered, some even wiping away tears. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment that would be remembered for years. Richard bent down and hugged Max tightly, whispering in his ear, "This is all because of you." For the first time since the accident, Richard felt completely whole again. He no longer thought of himself as a victim of a crash, but as a man who had been given a second chance through the loyalty of a friend. After the ceremony, people approached Richard and Max to shake hands and pet the dog. Children hugged him, adults thanked him, and the officers smiled proudly at the attention Max received. Though Max wagged his tail happily, he often turned his head back toward Richard, making sure his owner was never far. That night, after all the excitement, Richard sat on his porch with Max beside him. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the stars sparkled like diamonds above them. Richard ran his hand through Max's fur and sighed deeply. "You know, buddy, I think people needed this story," he said softly. "The world can be tough sometimes. People forget about hope, about loyalty, about simple love. But you reminded them. You reminded me too." Max leaned against him, pressing his body close. The silence of the night was peaceful, and Richard closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it all in. As days turned into weeks, Richard's strength returned fully. He was able to work again, drive again, and live as he had before the accident. But something inside him had changed. He no longer rushed through life. Every morning he made time to take Max for a long walk, greeting neighbors, letting children pet him, and smiling at the joy his dog brought to others. Max, once just a loyal companion at home, had become a symbol in the community. Schools invited Richard to share the story, and children listened wide-eyed as he described how Max had run into the night and begged for help. Some even asked their parents for dogs of their own, inspired by the story of a German Shepherd who never gave up. One evening, as Richard and Max walked down the street, Davis's patrol car slowed beside them. The window rolled down and Davis leaned out with a grin. "Still keeping him on patrol duty?" Richard laughed. "He doesn't give me much choice." Max barked as if to agree, and Davis waved before driving off. It warmed Richard's heart to know that Max had touched not only his life, but also the lives of the officers who had answered that call. Months later, Richard often reflected on the accident. He thought of how quickly life could change, how close he had come to never seeing another sunrise. And every time he thought about it, he looked at Max and whispered a quiet thank you. The memory of that night would never fade. The quiet road, the crash, the darkness, and then the sudden sound of paws running, barking, demanding attention. The image of Max blocking the police car and refusing to move was forever carved into Richard's mind. And the lesson was clear. True loyalty doesn't need words. It doesn't ask for rewards. It simply acts because love gives it the strength to do so. Richard leaned back in his chair one late afternoon, watching Max chase butterflies across the yard. He smiled, knowing that he owed everything to the dog that the world now called a hero. But to him, Max wasn't just a hero. He was family. The story of the night when a German Shepherd begged for help and saved his owner became part of local legend. But for Richard, it was more than a story. It was a reminder of hope, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the yard, Richard whispered once more, "Good boy, Max, good boy."